You're not welcome here anymore. That's what my uncle told me right there, on Grandma's porch, the moment I arrived for her memorial. No hugs, no words, just a locked door. They changed the code, moved the time, cut me off. And me, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even ask why. I just turned around and walked away. 1 week later, the name on the deed was mine, and the one serving them the eviction notice. Also me. My name is Maya Lawson, and I was never supposed to belong. That's how it's always been in the Lawson family. I was the orphan, the outsider, the one they only mentioned in passing. My parents died when I was 6. Car accident. I don't even remember the crash, just the silence afterward. The only person who ever held me close was Grandma Pearl. Her house on Wilmington Avenue was my world. A pale blue porch, hanging plants, squeaky swing, the smell of cinnamon rolls on Saturdays. That was my childhood. That was home. But to the rest of the family, especially Uncle Raymond, I was just baggage. They were always polite in front of Grandma, of course. But behind her back, I'd hear the whispers. She's not really one of us. Pearl spoils her. Dead weight. Still, I never said a word. Grandma said, "You don't need to raise your voice to be strong." So I learned to smile and stay quiet. I grew up, moved to Charlotte, became a real estate accountant, built a steady, quiet life. Every month, I called Grandma. Every holiday, I drove down to see her. And every time I sat on that porch, I felt whole. Until one day, the calls stopped. I got a text from my cousin Tara, sorry to hear about Grandma. Just like that, no one called me. No one invited me to the memorial. They didn't even tell me she was gone. I drove down anyway, heart pounding. Maybe it was a mistake. I thought, maybe they forgot. Maybe someone would see me and say, "Maya, I'm so sorry. Come in." But when I arrived, the porch was filled with folding chairs and people in black, platters of food, someone playing an old hymn from Grandma's record collection. And there, standing like a guard dog by the front door, was Uncle Raymond. He looked me up and down, didn't move, didn't blink. And then he said it. "You're not welcome here anymore." That's all. No explanation. No remorse. Just cold silence. I stood there, hands trembling, not because I was afraid, but because my house was suddenly a stranger. I looked past him. I saw people I knew, people who watched me grow up. Not one of them looked at me. Not one of them stood up. So I did the only thing I could. I turned around, walked back to my car, and drove away. But here's the thing they didn't know. 3 months before Grandma passed, she called me, said she needed help sorting out the paperwork on the house. She wanted to make sure things were clean, simple, legal. She didn't trust the others. Said they only came around when something needed to be split. So I helped her. I drove down, sat with her at the kitchen table. We went through taxes, utility bills, insurance, and the deed. Grandma looked me in the eye and said, "This house raised you. Maya, it should protect you too." She signed a transfer of ownership, filed it with her lawyer, with the county, kept a copy in the safe under her bed, and mailed one to me. I tucked it away, didn't think much of it, didn't expect to need it, until the day I was told I no longer belonged. They didn't just cut me off. They woke up the side of me that remembers everything. And I had one very powerful piece of paper with my name already on it, signed, notarized, sealed, and from that moment on, this wasn't about grief anymore. It was about taking back what was always mine. The drive back to Charlotte felt colder than usual, not because of the weather, but because something inside me had shifted. I wasn't the little girl on the porch anymore. I was the legal owner of that house, and they had no idea. I remember gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white, replaying Uncle Raymond's voice over and over in my head. "You're not welcome here anymore." He thought he had the last word. He thought I'd vanish quietly like I always did. But I wasn't quiet because I was weak. I was quiet because I was calculating. And now, every calculation led to one truth. They had taken something sacred, so I would take something back. The moment I got home, I pulled out the folder, cream-colored, slightly bent at the edges. Inside every document Grandma had given me, the deed transfer, the notarized signatures, the letter she wrote, a letter I hadn't read in full until that night. Her handwriting was delicate, shaky, but every word cut deep. If they ever turn their backs on you, baby girl, remember this paper means you never needed their approval. I clutched that letter to my chest like armor. And the next morning, I called her attorney. Mr. Granger remembered me immediately. Pearl always said you were the only one with a good head on her shoulders. He chuckled. I didn't smile. I was past the point of laughing. I told him what happened. How they held a memorial without me. How they locked me out. He went silent. Then I think it's time we finish what Pearl started. He walked me through the county filing process again, pulled the digital property record, and just as I suspected, the house was still under Grandma's name. The transfer hadn't been contested. No probate claim had been filed. Legally, that house was in limbo. But I had the documents, and I had the truth. Are you ready for this, Maya? He asked. This will start a fire. I didn't hesitate. Let it burn. We filed everything that week. I sent in the deed transfer, the notarized letter, paid the fees, checked the mailbox twice a day until I held the stamped confirmation in my hand. Title: Maya Lawson, sole owner. I didn't tell a soul. Not Tara, not Aunt Marie, not even my best friend. I let them keep drinking sweet tea on the porch, thinking they had won. They thought I'd been erased. But I was just getting started. The next step, paperwork. I contacted a process server, told them I needed a formal eviction notice served to occupants illegally residing in my property. He asked for proof. I sent him everything, the documents, the timeline, photos from the memorial. He whistled on the phone. You're about to ruin someone's month. I smiled for the first time in days. Make sure they read every word. Then came the date. I didn't sleep the night before. I stood in front of my mirror, rehearsing what I'd say if Raymond tried to stop me again. But truth be told, I didn't plan to say much. Power doesn't need to shout. It shows up with documents, with dates, with signatures. I wore my favorite black coat, the one Grandma always said made me look like a lawyer. Met the process server 2 blocks away. He handed me a copy of the notice, titled in bold, Notice to Vacate Premises. We walked to the house together. It was a sunny Thursday, the same porch, the same wind chimes, but this time it didn't feel like they were home. It felt like I was returning. Uncle Raymond answered the door in a flannel shirt, holding a coffee mug. His eyes narrowed the moment he saw me. What do you want? I didn't answer. The process server stepped forward. Are you Mr. Raymond Lawson? Yeah. Who's asking, sir? You've been served. You have 14 days to vacate this property. All details are enclosed. He handed over the manila envelope. Raymond didn't take it at first. He looked at me. You can't be serious. I met his gaze. Calm, centered, dead serious. He opened the envelope on the spot. His face turned the color of dishwater. His mouth opened, then closed again. For once, he had nothing to say. Behind him, I saw his wife Gloria step into view. What's going on? He looked at her, then back at me. She owns the house now. Gloria's jaw dropped. Since when I said nothing, just turned and walked down the steps. Each footstep felt lighter, each breath deeper. This was the beginning of the end for them, but the beginning of restoration for me. Back in the car, I exhaled hard. Let the silence fill the space. Not the silence of pain, the silence of peace. They thought cutting me off would destroy me, but all it did was give me the clarity to cut them off, legally. And now they had 14 days to pack, to leave, to face the truth. that I wasn't just the forgotten niece anymore. I was the rightful heir, and I had the documents to prove it. The next few days were quiet, almost too quiet. I expected phone calls, angry texts, someone pounding on my door, but nothing came. They were probably scrambling, calling cousins, digging through papers, looking for loopholes, but there weren't any. Grandma had done everything legally, and I had followed it to the letter. I went to work as usual, answered emails, took long walks, but my mind was always back at that house, at the porch, at the place that raised me. I remembered every board, every creak of the floor. I remembered Grandma's perfume lavender and cedarwood. I remembered how she made me hot cocoa on rainy days and told me to dream bigger than anyone expected. And now I wasn't just dreaming. I was reclaiming. The law gave them 14 days. I gave them mercy. I waited the full 2 weeks without pushing. But on the morning of the 15th day, I drove back down to Wilmington Avenue. This time, alone. No process server, no lawyer. Just me. The yard looked less tidy than before. The porch swing was still. And as I stepped onto the path, the door opened slowly. It was Gloria. She looked tired, pale, smaller than I remembered. "Maya," she said, her voice cracking. I waited. She stepped out and closed the door behind her. "We're packing up. We'll be out by tomorrow." I nodded. No gloating, no insults. Just acknowledgement. "I appreciate that." I said. There was a pause. Then, quietly, she added, "Pearl always said you were the quiet storm in this family. We should have listened." And with that, she walked back in. I stood there for a while, letting the breeze hit my face, looking at the windows I used to peek out of as a child, listening to the distant chime of wind bells that never stopped singing. When I left that day, I didn't feel vengeful. I felt complete. The girl they tried to erase had become the woman who held the deed, not just to a house, but to every piece of power they thought I didn't have. And that was just the beginning. Day 16. The house was empty. I parked by the curb just after sunrise. The air was crisp, quiet. No cars in the driveway, no voices behind the windows, just the soft creak of the porch swing moving with the wind. I stood there for a long moment, not because I doubted what I had done, but because walking through that door meant everything had changed. This was no longer a memory. It was mine. In name. In law. In soul. The key turned easily. I stepped inside. Alone. The air smelled different, like dust and old perfume. But the bones of the house were still the same. Same hardwood floors. Same crown molding above the fireplace. Same spot where Grandma used to sit, knitting scarves for neighbors. But something else lingered too. The ghost of erasure. The marks of people who pretended I didn't exist. A wine stain on the rug. Photos on the fridge that never included me. A dent in the wall near the hallway, probably from when they moved furniture in. Never thinking I'd return. And now they were gone. No confrontation, no apology, just silence. But I didn't need their words. I had the deed, and I had the will to rebuild. I walked through every room with slow, deliberate steps. The guest room still had plastic covers on the mattress. The kitchen was nearly empty, just a few expired cans left behind. They had packed up fast, maybe even afraid. I opened the back door. The garden was overgrown, but the lilac bush Grandma planted was still standing. Dry, a little frail but alive, like me. Barely tended. Cut off, but rooted deep. That night, I slept in my childhood room. I lay on the mattress with nothing but a folded hoodie as a pillow. No sheets, no furniture yet, but I didn't care, because this was my first night back. I cried, not because I was sad, but because the silence was finally mine. It didn't belong to them anymore. No more pretending. No more looking in from the outside. I woke up early, sat on the porch, coffee in hand. Neighbors walked by, some nodding politely, unsure whether to say anything. But one woman, Mrs. Delaney, stopped at the gate. She looked at me for a moment, then said, "You're Pearl's girl." "Right." I nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Her eyes softened. "It's good to see you back." And then she walked on, and I exhaled, like something heavy had been lifted. The next week, I rolled up my sleeves, scrubbed the kitchen from top to bottom, opened every window to let the stale air out, boxed up every photo that didn't have me in it, not out of spite, but out of necessity. I was building a home, not preserving their lie. With every drawer I emptied, every wall I repainted, I felt like I was writing my name into the wood, claiming it not as an act of revenge, but of rebirth. I found old things of Grandma's in the attic. A quilt she never finished, her recipe book, full of smudged ink and folded corners, a box of letters I'd written her as a child. She had saved everyone. That night, I cooked her favorite meal, rosemary chicken and sweet corn. I sat alone at the kitchen table, lit a candle, and whispered I kept my promise. But of course, peace doesn't always last. 3 weeks later, I received a letter, postmarked from my cousin Tara, no return address. Inside, a single note: "You stole it. That's all." No name, no warmth, no remorse, just accusation. I held the paper, staring at it under the porch light. And then, I laughed, not bitterly, not cruelly, just a soft, tired laugh. Because after everything, they still couldn't see it. I didn't steal the house. They tried to erase me from it. And I simply reappeared. They had no idea what strength looks like. They thought it was shouting at doorsteps, winning popularity contests, rewriting family trees with whispers. But real strength, it's walking away when your heart is shattered. It's building something quietly, document by document. It's showing up with a key, a name, and a signature. I wrote a reply to Tara, but I never sent it. What could I say that the county records hadn't already declared instead? I framed Grandma's deed and hung it by the front door. Not to boast, but to remind myself that even in silence, justice speaks. Today, the house is different. It's painted a fresh shade of deep blue. The porch swing doesn't creak anymore. There's a small plaque above the mailbox. The Lawson Home, Est, 1972, reclaimed, 2025. And every time I unlock the door, I whisper, "I'm home." Grandma, that night, I stood on the front steps with a cup of tea in hand. The stars were out, scattered like Grandma's old silver pins across velvet sky. I remembered how we used to sit here together. She'd hold my hand and tell me stories about the stars, saying they were windows for the ancestors to watch us. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I hope you're watching now." And deep inside, I felt she was. The days began to blur into rhythm. Morning walks through the neighborhood, repairs to the porch rail, painting the shutters. A man from down the road offered to help fix the garden fence, said he remembered Grandma fondly, said she used to bring over biscuits just because. We worked in quiet harmony, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I started writing again, journaling, letters to myself, letters to her. I wrote about grief, about betrayal, about love that goes unrecognized until it's gone, and about the kind of revenge that doesn't shout, the kind that heals, that reclaims. In town, people started to recognize me. Some smiled, some avoided eye contact. Word had spread that the niece came back, that Pearl left it to her. Some called it scandal, some called it justice, but I didn't care what they called it, because I knew what it was. A full circle return. a promise fulfilled, a door that had always been meant for me. One afternoon, I found something in the crawl space, an old wooden box with a latch, inside letters, dozens of them, written by Grandma. To me, never mailed. She must have written them in her final months. Each one began with my sweet Maya. Each one ended with, "Come home when you're ready. It will always be yours." I cried harder than I ever had, not out of pain, but out of recognition, that even in her last days, she saw me, loved me, prepared for me. She didn't leave me out. She made sure I would never again be left out. That house was her legacy, but I was her story's continuation, and I would honor that every day, every brick, every breath within these walls. Weeks passed. The house became mine in more ways than one, not just on paper, not just in memory, but in presence, in intention, in breath. Every time I swept the floors, every time I watered the garden, I felt Grandma's spirit settle deeper into the walls. She wasn't haunting the place. She was grounding it, through me. One morning, as I was repainting the kitchen cabinets, I heard a knock on the door, not a soft one, firm, rhythmic. I wiped my hands, opened the door, and there she was. Tara, looking thinner, tired, and still holding her chin a little too high. She didn't say hi. She didn't ask to come in. She simply said, "You could have talked to us first." I looked at her. Really looked. The same cousin who used to borrow my crayons and never give them back. The same one who laughed with the others when they forgot to tell me about Grandma's last Christmas. And here she was. Standing on the porch of the house, she tried to erase me from asking for a conversation. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just said, "You changed the code, remember?" She shifted her weight. "That wasn't my idea, Lo, but you didn't stop it." Her eyes darted. Guilt is funny like that. It always looks for a corner to hide in. You blindsided everyone. Maya, you humiliated Uncle Ray. I raised an eyebrow. Did he feel humiliated when he said I wasn't welcome? When you all held her memorial without me, Tara went quiet. I let the silence stretch, just long enough to feel like truth. Finally, she said, she was supposed to leave it to the family. That word, supposed, landed like a stone. I leaned against the doorframe. She did leave it to family, to the one who was actually there. Tara looked like she might cry or yell, or both. But all she did was whisper, "We didn't think you'd fight back." And that was the most honest thing she'd said. I didn't invite her in. I didn't slam the door either. I simply said, "Next time you forget I exist, make sure I don't have a title in the courthouse." Then I closed the door, gently, deliberately. I stood there for a moment, breathing, feeling the weight of all the words I didn't say, and all the ones that didn't need to be spoken anymore. The next day, I installed a new lock, not because I feared her, but because that house was no longer a place they could enter without invitation, not physically, not emotionally, not spiritually. I was reclaiming everything, not just the house, but the parts of me I used to mute in order to survive them, the part that wanted to be seen, to be heard, to stop apologizing for existing. That night, I found one of Grandma's old cassette tapes, labeled Pearl, Porch Nights. I dug out her dusty tape player, popped it in, and let her voice fill the living room. Her laugh was soft, her stories rambling but full of magic. She spoke like she knew someone would listen long after she was gone. And I did. I sat there, knees tucked to my chest, and listened. To her voice. To mine. To the silence between us that now meant comfort instead of abandonment. Later that week, a lawyer representing Raymond sent me a letter, an inquiry, a subtle threat hidden in formal words. He wanted to know if the documents were final, if there had been any undue influence, if I was open to mediation. I sent back a copy of the original deed transfer, signed, notarized, witnessed, stamped by the county, along with a post-it note in my handwriting. This house is not available for negotiation. I never heard back. A month passed, then two. I planted herbs in the kitchen window, hung Grandma's apron by the stove, refinished the dining table she used to host Sunday suppers on, and slowly, I stopped checking the mailbox for more letters, because the house had grown quiet again. Not empty, but full up, with everything that was real, everything that mattered. I hosted my first dinner in that house a few weeks later. Just 3 friends, no family, not by blood. Anyway, we laughed loud, we broke bread, we raised glasses and toasted to new beginnings. And I looked around that table and thought, this is what family feels like. Not DNA, but devotion. Not history, but healing. After they left, I sat out on the porch alone. The stars above me, the house behind me, and in that moment, I wasn't the orphan. I wasn't the afterthought. I wasn't the ghost at the family gathering. I was the woman who came back, who didn't raise her voice, who didn't seek revenge through violence or spite, but through ownership, through quiet power, through every signed page, every notarized name, every door I now lock on my terms. They wanted me gone. They never thought I'd return, but I did more than come back. I became undeniable. A few days later, I opened the hallway closet. I hadn't touched it since returning. Inside, I found boxes with old keepsakes, some from my childhood, some from Grandma's. There was a worn leather pouch labeled Maya's Notes. Inside were drawings I made at age 7, stick figures, crooked hearts, and one clumsy sketch of this very house with a smiling woman and a small girl on the porch. Grandma had kept them, protected them, like she had protected me, even when no one else would. I placed those drawings in a new wooden frame and hung them in the hallway. Next to them, I added the framed deed. That wall became a monument, not of ownership, but of survival, of stories reclaimed, of blood ties that had failed me and love that had not. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch at dusk and write letters I never mailed. To Raymond, to Tara, to Aunt Marie. Not bitter words, not curses, just truths they never bothered to ask. Like how I used to sleep on Grandma's lap during storms. Or how she whispered to me after nightmares, "You are not a mistake, baby. You're my beginning again." They never heard those words, but I did, and that made all the difference. I received one more letter from a name I didn't expect, Aunt Marie. The envelope was formal, her handwriting still stiff. Inside, a note that read, "We were wrong. She loved you more than we understood. Take care of the house." It was her soul. No apology, but I didn't need one. That letter, short as it was, held more truth than years of silence, and I promised myself. From that moment on, this house would never again hold anyone who didn't belong. It would never again be a stage for erasure. It would be a sanctuary, for truth, for memory, for the kind of love that signs your name in ink when everyone else leaves you off the list. It took months for the echoes to fade, not from the walls, but from within me. Grief doesn't leave just because justice arrives. It lingers, soft at first, then sharp in the quiet moments. I still had dreams of that porch, not nightmares, just flickers, of Grandma's hand on mine, of my name spoken like it belonged. But healing isn't linear. Some days I walked barefoot through the hallway, humming old gospel hymns. Other days, I stood still in the middle of the living room and wondered why winning could still feel so lonely. Then came the letter. Certified. County seal. My chest tightened when I saw the envelope. For a second, I thought maybe they'd found some loophole, some challenge, some hidden clause. But when I opened it, I went cold. Inside was a record of a second will, filed, dated, claimed to be signed by Grandma. and it named Raymond as the sole inheritor of the house. I dropped the paper. It felt like someone had yanked the floor out from under me. I sat there, silent, as the world spun. How, why now? And most of all, was it real? I took the document to Mr. Granger the next day. His jaw tensed the moment he skimmed the page. This isn't her handwriting. He pulled out a stack of verified documents, signature comparisons, notary stamps, dates that overlapped suspiciously. He leaned back. This was submitted after her passing. That alone makes it invalid. But still. He paused. Someone went through a lot of trouble trying to overwrite what she left you. I felt the heat rise in my chest. Not from fear, but fury. They couldn't stand it. Even now, months later, they were still trying to rewrite the ending, still trying to claim what was never theirs. But they underestimated something. I wasn't the girl who walked away anymore. I was the woman who read the fine print, the woman who knew where every document lived, the one who carried 2 signed affidavits, a video testimonial, and the original deed transfer filed, sealed, witnessed. We submitted a formal response, attached every shred of proof, and in the final page, Mr. Granger added one powerful statement. Any future attempts to claim ownership without legal basis will be treated as fraud. 3 weeks later, I received the verdict. The county court dismissed the forged will, with prejudice, meaning they couldn't try again. Not tomorrow. Not ever. And just like that, the house was no longer in limbo. It was mine. Again. Still. Forever. I didn't throw a celebration. I didn't post about it. Instead, I hosted a community dinner in the backyard, invited the neighbors, set up folding tables, cooked Grandma's chili recipe with extra spice, and when the sun set, I stood with a glass of lemonade and said only this. This home has seen many things, but tonight it sees family again. People clapped, some smiled, one woman cried, and I felt something shift, not just in the soil beneath me, but in the story I'd carried for so long, a story that began with exile and ended with return. Weeks later, I received a message from Tara. Just 3 words: we were wrong. I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because sometimes silence is the loudest truth. That winter, I put up lights for the first time in years, hung stockings on the mantel, even bought a tree that nearly scraped the ceiling, and on Christmas Eve, I lit a single candle for Grandma, placed it on the porch, watched it flicker in the dark like a heartbeat. Then I whispered, "They tried to take you away from me, but you left me something stronger than memory. You left me proof." This house wasn't revenge. It wasn't payback. It was a love letter, sealed in law, delivered in silence, and signed in my name. Some people fight back with fists, some with fire, but me, I fought with filings, with signatures, with patience, and I won. Not because I was loud, but because I was undeniable. In January, I began turning the guest room into something new. Not for visitors, not for them, for me. I painted the walls a soft sage green, installed new shelves, stacked them with books I had collected but never had space to display. In the corner, I placed a desk, solid oak, scratched at the edges, but still strong. It reminded me of myself. I made that room my writing space. Every morning, I'd sit at that desk and write not about revenge, but about truth. I wrote about legacy, about what it means to hold power in quiet hands, about how justice doesn't always roar, it sometimes knocks softly, holding a notarized envelope. And the stories poured out of me, not just mine, but the ones of women like me, women erased, overlooked, silenced, women who didn't burn things down but rebuilt them, beam by beam. My voice grew louder on the page, not because I was shouting, but because I was finally speaking. One spring afternoon, I received a phone call from a local community center. They had heard about the house, about the legal battle, the restoration. They asked if I would speak to young women about inheritance, ownership, and protecting their rights. At first, I hesitated, but then I thought of Grandma, of her calloused hands, her quiet strength, and I said yes. The first time I stood in front of a group and told my story, I felt my voice tremble, but I didn't stop. Because every head that nodded, every tear that fell, every woman who whispered afterward, "Thank you," told me that my fight wasn't just mine. It was for all of us who were told, "You don't belong," for all of us who were cut off, left out, pushed aside, and who came back anyway. The house is still standing, brighter, stronger, fuller. It's no longer a place haunted by betrayal. It's a monument to silent power, to every woman who reclaims what's hers, not by screaming, but by signing the final line. On the 1-year anniversary of Grandma's passing, I stood alone in the garden. The lilac bush she planted had bloomed again, purple, proud, and fragrant. I laid a stone at its base, not a gravestone, a gratitude stone, engraved with 4 simple words, "You brought me home." I spent the day not in mourning, but in ritual, baked her sweetbread recipe, cleaned the floorboards she once mopped in humming rhythm, read her letters, lit a candle in every room she loved, and at sunset, I opened all the windows, let the wind pass through, let the silence wrap me like a shawl. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was legacy made real. It was paper turned into purpose. It was my story, carved from erasure, blooming into permanence. So when people ask me now, was it worth the fight? I don't speak. I open the front door, let them step inside, let them feel what Grandma built, and what I rebuilt brick by brick through grace, grit, and law, because in the end, they cut me off. So I bought the house and gave myself the final word.